What makes a good thesis? This video, we will detail several simple rules to follow so that you are able to craft a strong thesis. So here is our sample thesis. The United States entered World War I as a direct result of Germany's military tactics. Now, the first thing we want to look at is whether or not our thesis is argumentative. Does it make an argument? Now, in middle school, any argument or any statement was argumentative. I.e., for example, the sky is red. No, the sky is blue. That is an argument. However, in our class, we're trying to make more sophisticated arguments. So just because someone can say, no, it's not, does not make it argumentative. What makes it argumentative is that there's another possible theory. So for example, someone could look at this thesis argument and say, more than just no, but give a specific reason as to why they disagree. For example, someone could argue that it was not a direct result, that it was an indirect result that led to the United States entering the war. Another example, someone could argue that it wasn't military tactics, that it was changing economics of the time period. That's what makes this argumentative. Our second step will be to test for wording. So first, under wording, we want to make sure that our thesis argument is grammatically correct. So here we have an example where the wording is not as grammatically strong. The entrance into World War I by the United States was directly caused by Germany's military tactics. One example that's not as strong here is that directly caused by, although not exactly passive, is still more passive sounding than active. We want to take an active approach when we make our arguments. Secondly, there's some awkward wording in terms of the beginning of the argument. The entrance into World War I by the United States will be much better worded by being more direct. The United States entered World War I. Here is our stronger example. The United States entered World War I as a direct result of Germany's military tactics. One of the other aspects to consider with wording is to make sure that we don't include extra unnecessary information. A lot of times I call this explanatory information that's not necessary for the argument. Students will often start the thesis with statements like these. After several years of neutrality, the United States entered World War I. Or after the deaths of several Americans, the United States entered World War I. Both of these statements are accurate information. However, both of these statements are unnecessary for the overall argument. In fact, they would be great information to include as part of your introduction paragraph, see that video, but they're not necessary for your thesis. Thus, they're extra, unnecessary, explanatory information because you're often trying to explain something about your argument. Our third and final step is to examine our thesis and see if we were able to incorporate an analytical parameter. By analytical parameter, what you're doing is essentially categorizing the evidence that you're going to talk about later in the essay. The key here is that you want to avoid using your specific evidence in your thesis. So if in this essay, a student is going to focus on Germany's use of submarine warfare, instead of writing submarine warfare here in your thesis, you should write military tactics. That is a way of categorizing and describing the evidence that you're going to talk about later on. On the subject of analytical parameters, any of these serve and operate as analytical parameters. You have to figure out what is the relevant one for you based on the evidence at hand in the essay. Military, social, economic, religious, moral, political, and there are many others. But the idea is still the same. You want to categorize, using an analytical parameter, your information that you're going to talk about later in the essay. rather than put the direct evidence in the thesis argument itself. So in summary, the 3 steps you want to follow in crafting a strong thesis are: is it argumentative? Checking its wording, both for grammatical correctness, as well as ensuring that we don't have any extra unnecessary explanatory words. And lastly, in order to make sure it's as sophisticated as possible, incorporating and using analytical parameters.